Hello, everyone. Welcome. We'll give folks a minute or two to jump in here before we get started. Very excited to see some familiar names joining. If you're just joining us, if this is your first time, or if you're a return attendee, feel free to shoot us a message in the chat. We'd love to know where you're calling in from. We've had folks from all over the world, all over the country. Always really fun to see where folks are.
And if you can, post a link to your LinkedIn as well, so we can all get connected with each other.
Absolutely. We love it. It's one of the best things about these kinds of events, that community building, connecting with folks. So welcome, guys. I see some snow-covered Denver, Pennsylvania, Salt Lake, Toronto. I'm also in snow-covered Denver. I was just telling Chris it is really dumping snow outside my window right now.
We had snow last week. I'm also in Salt Lake City, so we had a little dusting. Although, in order to get some great skiing in, I'm hoping for what you have right now, Marley.
Absolutely, be good. Get some good days on the slopes.
Yeah.
Well, I know folks are still trickling in, but we will go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Welcome to the first Customer Success Unlocked of 2022. So exciting to be here in a new year with all of you. I'm Marley Wagner. I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Digital Customer Success here at ESG. And I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar titled, What It Takes to Become a Customer-Led Growth Leader. Before we get started, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. First, today's session will be a fireside chat style interview, so you may not be seeing slides on the screen, but I promise nothing wrong with your Zoom. Keep listening. Second, just like to remind everyone, we are recording this session. The link to the recording will be available within 24 hours of the webinar. Throughout the session today, really encourage everyone to submit your questions via the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen. Chris and I will get to as many questions as we possibly can. And now, without further ado, I'd like to give a warm welcome to our presenter today, Chris Hicken, CEO and co-founder of Nuffsaid. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Marley. I really appreciate you inviting us today. I also want to just start by thanking you and ESG for everything that you do to help advocate for CS and helping us as a community level up. For everyone who's listening in here, Marley did a stellar podcast on digital CS with Nuffsaid recently, which is definitely worth a listen, especially if you're investing in digital CS or low touch this year. It's really a must listen. So a little bit about me. I'm one of 3 co-founders at Nuffsaid. We are a company building a suite of products for customer success teams to help you to focus on, we kind of acknowledge that you're busy, you have way too much going on, too many customers, too many messages. So we're helping to build products that will help you to focus and act on customers that matter. Previously, I was at User Testing for 8 years. I was president and COO there. User Testing is a customer user experience company. They went public late last year. And I mentioned this in the chat, but I'm originally from the Bay Area, currently living in Salt Lake City. And I guess, fun fact, I just got a telescope. So if anyone in the audience is into astrophotography, I'm looking for tips. So send them my way.
That's an awesome hobby. I want to see some photos from that.
Yeah. First up, we're going to do Andromeda. So send me notes on how to take pictures of Andromeda.
All right, I love it. That's fantastic. So before we jump into the meat of today's conversation, I am absolutely dying to know what the little stick face behind you is. Do you have a story behind that? Can you tell us?
Okay, so here's the story. This is Tianan, CFO of User Testing. His firstborn was due a week after User Testing's IPO. So he couldn't make it for obvious reasons. So we put his face on popsicle sticks and we paraded him around Wall Street and took selfies everywhere. So we've got an amazing library of Tianan's head on a popsicle stick all around the main Wall Street office.
That's awesome. So now he just gets to kind of hang out and be part of everything that's going on.
Exactly. He gets to be part of all my meetings.
I love it. Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so we are here to talk about customer-led growth. I think this concept is really, really exciting. And I know that you and the team at Nuffsaid have a unique perspective on the topic. So will you just start by telling us, what do we mean when we say customer-led growth? What does that term mean? Can you define it for us?
Yeah, customer-led growth it's an operating mode where everyone at the company is obsessed about the value that customers receive from the product and from the company. And in order to be product-led, three things have to be true. Number one, the company has to measure whether or not the customer has received value. And that's really two ways. One was the planned outcome achieved, the outcome that the customer expected to receive? More and more companies are doing that, but almost everyone misses the second one, which is, does the customer believe they received value? Number two, customer data has to be king. In other words, customer data is prioritized as the most important information that you can use when making decisions about pricing, ideal customer profile, your content roadmap, product features, etc. So we don't use internal data anymore. We don't use our opinions, we use customer data. And then number three, customer-led growth companies make outsized investments in their customer teams. So for example, at a customer-led growth company, the CFO isn't breathing over your shoulder saying things like, I want you to be more efficient this year. That's something that an older school company would do, where a CFO is looking at customer success as an overhead function, where it's one CSM per 2 million in revenue, and the CFO says, great, this year I want it to be one CSM per 2.3 million in revenue. Customer-led growth company would never do that, because in a customer-led growth company, the CFO and the CEO realizes that one of the best ways to drive up company value is to improve retention rates. So you don't look at CS as a place where you're cutting, you're looking at CS as a place where you invest.
Love that. And I think it ties back to this concept that I've been reading a lot about lately, and actually writing about. I shared an article in ESG's newsletter this morning, this concept that customer success is more than a department, right? It's a mindset. I think these things really, really go together nicely and cleanly and fit well into what you're talking about with customer-led growth. Am I hearing that right?
Yeah, and I think provided that, here's the thing. If you're in sales, everyone said, the sales leader says everyone at the company is in sales, and the product leader says everyone in the company is in product, right? And the customer success leader says everyone in the company is in charge of the customer's experience. So it's not helpful just to say things like, everyone is part of my team. It's more helpful to put in place operating rhythms and guidelines that enable the company to actually act in a way that achieves the mission of everyone being focused on the customer.
Yep, exactly. Love that. So I know we're going to get into some of those details, right? The what, the how do we do that, right? We understand, all right, this is what customer-led growth is. What does that entail specifically? So I know you recently published a really useful rubric to talk through this. I don't know if you want to pop that up on the screen now, but would love it if you could walk us through some of the most critical factors to consider when it comes to customer-led growth.
Yeah, and I think even before we do that, I think customer-led growth needs a little bit more context, which is how this thing even came about. And so let's take the farthest step back. We need to look at what motivates the CEO of almost every company. And the CEO's primary responsibility, at least in the eyes of their investors, is to increase overall company value. Mm-hmm. Of course, the CEO wants to change the world to make it a better place, but all of their incentives are financial incentives tied to company value. Mm-hmm. So in the early days of SaaS, investors rewarded companies that grew very, very, very quickly, which created the kind of V1 SaaS sales-led growth approach, where companies were willing to spend, 100% or more first-year revenue on sales and marketing. And because they were acquiring customers almost at any cost, these companies also tended to have higher churn rates because they weren't being as discerning about what kinds of customers they were acquiring. Fine. So then Wall Street looked at these companies and said, it's way too expensive to grow these SaaS companies. So we're no longer going to reward growth at any cost. Instead, they started rewarding companies that could grow efficiently. And from that transition emerged this product-led growth concept, which was the model where value delivered by the product plus network effects allowed companies to grow very quickly with minimal sales and marketing investments. And of course, because a customer could try the product, very early on, they would vote whether or not they liked it. So customers that tried it and liked it, they stuck around. So very high retention rates. Here's the rub. 95% of companies will never be product-led.
Yeah.
Because they're missing the key ingredients that make product-led growth possible. The most important one, the thing that disqualifies almost every company, is that you need to have a product that is so stupid simple to use, and the customer has to be able to get high value with minimal effort. The reality is most of us don't have products where you could click a button and get value. And that's pretty much what you need to enable product-led growth. So since 95% of companies will never be product-led, but investors still want low-cost growth and high retention rates, another model was needed. And that's really where customer-led growth came from. So when a company obsesses about the value that customers are receiving, it's really a forcing function. It forces a company to achieve really good product market fit. And when a company gets to really good product market fit, it enables great retention rates, it enables great customer advocacy, and the result of that is the company is able to grow revenue at a much lower cost than traditional sales-led models. So investors are getting what they need, and it's a model that can apply to most companies that will never be product-led. So that's where product-led growth comes from. And we came up with a rubric, and this is back to what we talked before about Marley. We don't want to just say like, hey, everyone at the company, should be customer focused.
Yeah.
We came up with a rubric which helps to operationalize the concept of customer-led growth in an easy way. The factors are things like, how do we operationalize pricing, or the ideal customer profile, or product features, or the way that the budget is set? And so the way that we're doing that, and let me maybe just pause. If you disagree with anything that I said, maybe we can have a conversation about that first. Are we spiritually aligned so far?
So far, so good, Chris. And I
All
think
right.
that was really helpful too, right? We certainly have heard a lot more about the concept of product-led growth. Just it's a more common term than this newer concept of customer-led growth. So I think it's important to differentiate between the two and understand how and why they're different, and how or why we needed this additional, model to operate under. So love that. I want to see the rubric. Can we see
Okay, let's take a look at the rubric. Okay. So here is think of it as like a self-assessment guide for determining how close your company is to achieving customer-led growth. And the way to read this is, on the left-hand side, we're going to give you a question that you can ask about how your company operates today. And then you can score yourself. There's a poor response, there's kind of like an average or an okay response, and there's an excellent response. So in this model, and I think we can go through a couple of examples here. One of my favorite ones is, how is the customer success budget determined? So when you're having a conversation with the CFO, if you're saying things like, I want 1 CSM for every $2 million in ARR, or I want 50 customers per CSM, that's a poor response, because what it does is it sets up customer success as an efficiency function that where the CFO needs to beat up on you over time to make the team more efficient.
Yeah.
An average response would be, looking at the ROI of CS. So you could say something like, for every $100,000 of additional budget that you give me this year in CS, I will return back to the company $500K in retention rate improvements. So this is good because it gets the CFO thinking more about CS as a way to, comparing an investment in CS versus an investment in sales versus an investment in product and what the returns are likely to be. So I think that's better.
Agreed.
But the best way is, remember, we have to go back to what is the CEO and the CFO, what do they care about the most? They care about increasing company value. Bessemer recently did a report that showed that for every point in net retention rate improvement, you get a 0.7x improvement in company valuation.
Yep.
Mind-blowing.
Huge.
So what the best way to advocate for CS is say, look, I'm going to improve our net retention rate by 3 percentage points this year. That will so 3 percentage points is equal to about a 2x improvement in company value. So if you're willing to spend, give me an extra $1 million this year, I will improve net retention rate by 3 percentage points, and I will double the value of our company.
Crazy.
That's the message that gets the CEO and the CFO really thinking about the value that you can add to the company. And by the way, we're happy we can share this report out with everyone. There's a very strong correlation between retention rate and company value, and it's actually the increases in company value are astounding.
Yep.
I see Chris Jones, you asked a question here. Do you think customer-led growth scares organizational leaders because when they hear CLG, they feel that this will give the customer too much power in driving their business? Well, are leaders worried? Well, some leaders might be worried about not being able to make decisions based on their gut, because a lot of leaders like making decisions based on their experience. A lot of leaders think that they know better than the customers. You always hear the quote of, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, right? The Henry Ford quote. The reality, though, is that, sure, when you're making product roadmap decisions, you do need someone who can interpret a customer problem and translate it into the correct product. But most decisions that need to be made in the company are more tactical, like what should our pricing be? And what should our content roadmap be? And what types of customers should we be targeting? And all of those things are better served with actually hearing from and understanding the customer. In fact, it's almost crazy. You know what the analogy that I use is, Chris? It's the operating room equivalent of a surgeon coming into the room, looking at the heart rate monitor and the blood oxygen level sensor, and then failing to ask the patient how they feel. Isn't that absurd? You would never even imagine that a surgeon would do that. But the way that we run our SaaS businesses, that's what we do. We look at our product usage data. We look at our time to value. We look at all of these internal metrics, but then we never ask the customer how they're feeling. Isn't that crazy? So anyhow, it's just the state of how the world works today. And in most cases, Chris, when I've shared this feedback with executives, there is this moment of like, yeah, why aren't we asking customers? That's so obvious. So I think there might be some fear on the product roadmap side of things, but I think in most other decisions, leaders will be very open to including customer feedback in the decision-making process.
I love that analogy so much, Chris, of the surgeon. That I feel like that really helps to solidify what we're talking about, right? Because otherwise it can be kind of this ephemeral concept. If you're like, hey, you can't just look at what we're doing internally, right? You have to actually ask the questions. So important.
And by the way, I see a note here from Greg. You made a comment that you just implemented CSQLs. That's amazing. What a great way to build a partnership with sales. Yes. You will become the all-star on the sales team by feeding the team more leads. So yeah, kudos to you for getting that in place. By the way, for CSQL is a CS qualified lead. It's a formal way of tracking leads, upsells, cross-sells that customer success is identifying in the customer base, and those get sent over usually to an account management or an account exec team to go chase growth in the accounts. Great way to improve net retention rate.
And we've seen, I don't know the exact stats off the top of my head, but we've seen some really powerful metrics that those CSQLs have the highest percent to close rate, you know, like you said, really impact retention rate, impact growth of your existing customer base. So metrics that you're already looking at can be really, really strongly impacted by implementing those CSQLs. And then even if your finance leader, you know, is maybe still not quite fully bought into all the concepts Chris is laying out here, you can say, guess what? We got X number of dollars in X period of time straight from customer success. That in and of itself is really powerful.
Yeah, and so, and if I can build on that exact topic here. So one of the other items here is, how is customer data shared with other departments? This is really critical, right? How can you be customer led if customer success, who's the champion of customer data, how can the company be successful making decisions unless we're arming our peers in marketing, in product, in finance, and in sales with customer data? So a poor response is that information is primarily shared via anecdotes and customer stories. The problem with that, of course, is that everyone can interpret that differently. It's not quantified. It's easy to forget. So that's a poor answer. An average answer would be, okay, well, we've got some formal feedback mechanisms, like we've got a customer advisory board. We do all hands meetings where we invite customers to come speak to us. We have an NPS score, which may or may not be helpful in determining the customer's engagement with us, but we at least have a score. And that's okay. That means we're getting better. But really what we want to get to is quantified experience data that's distributed monthly or more frequently to our peers in product, sales, and marketing so that they can make their key decisions. Quantified is the important part of this, which means that we understand, we're asking customers questions along their journey. We're recording their responses. So ideally, this is a it's a scale, 1 to 5, 1 to 10. So we're storing their answers, and then those responses are sent to the right person who has to make decisions over the course of the year so that they're including the customer data in those decisions. So we don't have to go through this whole rubric, but we're happy also later to share this rubric out with everyone who's here and listening in.
I see that Natalie on your team just shared that link in the chat.
Oh,
thank you, Natalie.
there it is.
And then,
thanks, Natalie.
We'll be sure to send it out in our follow-up email along with the recording tomorrow as well.
Great.
Awesome. And, you know, I know you said we don't need to go through all those this moment, and I agree, but when you have a chance, everyone, read through each line, because it really, as you read through it, like you just have an aha moment after aha moment after aha moment.
Well, let's just go through the questions so we know at least what we're talking about. So the first one is, who is responsible for retention? Here's the thing that at least, you know, there's a big debate. Should CSMs own renewals or should they not own renewals? Actually, I don't think that's an important discussion. The important discussion is, does the customer leader own a number? The customer leader could be a VP of CS, could be a chief customer officer. Yeah. Here's the problem. If the head of CS does not own revenue, they don't own a number that anyone in the company cares about. That's the harsh reality. Right. So the head of customer success or the chief customer officer must own revenue some way. Otherwise, all the glory and all the power goes to sales and product and marketing, and CS gets nothing. So who's responsible for retention? Who actually does the renewal transactions? How does the company measure whether or not the customers are receiving value? That's a big one. In fact, we'll talk about this, I think, a little bit later in the conversation today.
Yeah, this is a big one. We'll come back.
Yeah, how is customer data shared with other departments? How is the CS budget determined? How are upsell opportunities detected? So CSQLs, I think that's a good, I put that here. A company measures customer success qualified leads and rewards CSMs for creating them. That's we're right in the middle here. So we've made good progress. There's one level higher than that. How does the executive influence pricing, the customer success executive? How does the customer success executive influence the ideal customer profile? How does the customer success executive influence the content roadmap? So this could be customer marketing and also prospect marketing.
Yeah.
And then finally, how does the CS executive influence product features? I put this one last, but this one actually, in terms of importance is pretty high on the list.
We got a question coming in from Greg Watkins asking
Great.
exactly that. So I'll let you address that next, Chris.
Yeah, what has the biggest impact? Okay, so here's the two I'd put. It's probably three. How is the CS budget determined? Because you can't make a big impact in CS if you're always getting squeezed for budget and the CSMs are always in reactive mode, right? We all know what that feels like.
Mm-hmm.
Next, you have to measure whether or not customers are getting value. The reality is you just cannot be customer-led until you understand the customer's perception of value, full stop.
Mm-hmm.
The last one that I put in terms of influencing other executives, I'd put product at the top of the list. Product has so many different stakeholders screaming at them: sales, the executive team, the customer support on bugs and features. They have their own items that they want to be able to implement. They have to worry about tech debt. So the customer success team today at most orgs is a very poor steward of the customer's needs and experience. It's one of the ways where I think customer success can level up the most is how they communicate feature requests from customers to the product team. And we can talk more about that later as well. But those are the three that I would prioritize.
Yep, agreed. We're still on the same page here, Chris. I love it.
Okay, nice.
So I do want to dig into a couple of those things that you touched on a little deeper, right? Let's start with, measuring whether or not the customer has value, right? That's the end all be all here.
That's it. I think that's it.
Your surgeon analogy. If you're not asking how the patient is doing, you're doing something wrong. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, and in fact, I see Abish just asked this question too in the chat. So how do you actually do this? Yeah. So first, you have to define a standard library of questions that every customer will get asked along their journey. Okay, so that's step number one. You have to know what questions to ask. And I can help with that, by the way. ESG can help with that too.
True.
Step number two, those questions have to be asked however you interact with your customers. It can be over email, chat, in-person check-ins, QBRs. Wherever you talk to customers, those questions get asked and recorded. Typically, a response has two parts. It's a 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 scale, plus additional qualitative notes.
I think a lot of people forget that second part, right? They ask.
Has to be both.
The rating question, the open-ended is just as important.
It is. You must have both.
Yeah.
Each response has to carry some kind of relationship risk. And that relationship risk has to be applied differently depending on the role. So for example, if you ask a question like, how much value does Nuffsaid add to your business? Well, if a buyer rates that a 1 out of 10, how much risk are we going to assign to that versus if a power user rates it a 1 out of 10?
Yeah.
Okay, so you need to have the risk level associated with each type of response. And then finally, now you have this really nice database, right? You've got questions that are asked, qualitative responses, risk levels. The final thing that you need to do is make sure that the organization is armed to take action. So that will mean a couple of things. One is playbooks for CSMs. So when a really high risk comes in, what are CSMs going to do about it? And then also the data needs to be collated in a way that product can digest feature feedback, sales can digest ideal customer profile feedback, marketing can digest pricing feedback or competitor feedback. Those are both really interesting.
Yeah.
And on the onboarding team can digest time to value and onboarding integration problems. And so that's kind of step number 4, is that the data is used to arm everyone in the company with action, things that they can do today to improve the customer experience. So that's how we go from where we are today to building a data set of live customer data that can be used to drive and influence decisions.
So important. And I think, I also want to drill into what you just said about disseminating information to different parts of the company, different departments, and what you said earlier about, of those 3 departments we're talking about, sales, marketing, product, that product really is, the number 1 most important here. So let's dive into that a little bit.
Great. Yeah, I mean, the reality is, so here's how I'd think about it. Rather than just handing data over to product or sales or marketing, I want to start by thinking about what decisions do they make today, important decisions do they make today, without access to customer data. So, for example, in product, well, let's just go through each of them first. Product makes decisions like, when do I pay down technical debt? Right now, product has no access to customer data when they're making that decision. Isn't that crazy? They're making huge resource decisions for the company without customer data. Wow. Feature requests. How does it, a lot of times product, if you talk to product, and we recently talked to about 30 product managers, for the most part, they're using their gut to make a decision on what features to build and which ones not to build. Crazy town, right? Sales has to make decisions about which use cases they're going to pitch to customers. They have to make decisions about what their outbound emails are going to look like, their SDR emails. They have to make decisions about qualification, which customers are we going to talk to and which ones we aren't. None of that is driven by customer data.
That one is bananas.
Bananas. Isn't that crazy?
Yes.
And then in marketing is making decisions about content programs, both internal to customers and external, based on what's hot in the marketplace, what's on social media, not from customers, not from customer questions. Pricing is almost always set alongside the sales leader to optimize for acquiring new customers. Almost never are existing customer needs included. And things like the ideal customer profile. It's set by, the marketing team. They'll go out and do a couple of research interviews up front. They'll come up with their personas, and Bob and Mary have a cat, and they play basketball on the weekends. But what about the customer?
Right.
So those are the types of decisions. So when I'm thinking about what data to arm my peers with, I'm thinking, okay, what decisions do they need to make? Let's talk about product first. We said that's the most important one that we can influence. We'll start with the technical debt decision. One of the most important questions that you can ask customers is, how have technical challenges affected their experience? The answer to that question will tell you things like, how reliable is the system? Is it fast or slow to use?
Yeah.
Do we have a hard time accessing the product when it's needed? Is there downtime? Those are all indicators that technical debt have started to accrue in the system, and they're really starting to impact the customer experience. Technical debt should not be paid down when the engineering team is annoyed with the technical debt. It should be paid down when it impacts the customer experience, or when we believe it's about to impact the customer experience.
Yes.
They cannot make that decision without customer data. It's our fault that they don't have access to that data. And customer success, we are the ones with this data, and we're not giving it to them. All right. The next one is feature requests. So we talked to a lot of product managers recently, and here's what they hate. They hate when customer success says, I really need this feature built for this customer, otherwise I'm going to lose the renewal.
Yep.
Or this customer is really annoying, they keep asking me for this feature, and I really need this feature built. In fact, any conversations about features, product does not want to have that conversation. They feel like that's you doing their job for them. They do not talk about features. What do they want instead? They want to know, in the customer's words, what is the customer asking for? Not in your words, but in the customer's words.
Yeah.
They want to know, what problem does the customer need to solve? Because this is the horse, faster horse versus a car, right? And then finally, they want to know what's the revenue impact of building each feature, because they have to weight your requests with sales requests, with bug and feature requests, with the executive team. So what the ideal thing that you will present to the product team is a list of problem themes, problems that customers need to address. You will include for each problem theme the number of customers that have requested, how long each customer has been waiting for that request, the revenue, the likely revenue impact. So this could be the incremental expansion, the incremental decrease in contract, or churn. So what's the revenue potential of that? And then finally, the likelihood that it will impact the customer's renewal event.
That's an important one.
All of those things have to be included. By the way, almost no one generates this report today because there are some technical challenges, but there are tools that are being developed to do this for you much more easily.
Yep. And, even things like, communities where customers can upvote other customers' ideas or questions or problems or whatever, right? There are creative solutions to get this information, but yes, it is certainly easier said than done in reality.
Yeah, and so I think those two things are probably, I mean, we could talk more about product, but those are the two things we can do with product today to have a huge impact on how the company builds its product today for customers.
All right, how about one thing each for sales and marketing?
Okay, so let's do my favorite one for sales, which is qualification.
Yes.
So the way that customers are qualified today, and most sales teams, you'll hear sales leaders talking about BANT, budget, authority, need, timing, or MEDDIC, or there's actually a number of different qualification techniques. But none of those take into account customer experience with the product, which I think is absolutely crazy. So what if you could arm SDRs with use cases that create the highest value for customers? So you let them know which use cases. If the customer says yes, they're likely to be a really great customer for the company. Mm-hmm. Or what about other segmentation criteria? Like, we know that customers who use Gmail are 3 times more likely to renew. Or customers who have purchased this type of software before will understand the value more quickly. Or companies who have I might make something up here. Companies who have a chief experience officer tend to get more budget. These are all things that we know in customer success, but that information never makes it back to sales. So the result is SDRs are making all these qualification decisions for you in customer success, and the voice of your customers has had no impact in that qualification.
Yep. There can be a lot of tension between sales teams and CS teams, for a number of reasons. One of which commonly is sales is selling bad fit customers. Guess what, CS teams? It's not just on sales to help them solve that problem. It's on you too to help them do that with that data.
So here's the question that you asked shortly after onboarding. The question is, how closely does the product match the expectations set in the sales process?
Yep.
You have to ask that question. You have to record the answer to that question. Here's the thing. A lot of times, it's actually not even the sales team's fault. A lot of times, the sales team gets poor product training. They aren't kept up to date on product the way that you are in customer success. So the result is that they oversell or undersell. It's actually both cases happen.
True.
You have a customer comes in and says like, whoa, I didn't know your product did this. Well, it's because the salesperson didn't know to pitch that use case. So that's how you can influence how the SDR team, the sales team, talks about the product and make sure that it is sold the right way to the right use case, so that when it gets handed off to you, you have the highest likelihood of retaining that customer.
Yes, I love that. And I see in the chat, Alex is telling you that's the best question
Yeah.
I agree with that. I very strongly agree with that.
Yeah, look, actually, I mean, I know that question feels good, but there's a whole library of questions that we've come up with, like this one, that really get to the heart of like, okay, what's the actual customer experience, and how do I help my teammates in other departments get better?
Yep. You know, we've been talking a lot internally at ESG about how to ask for feedback that actually gives you the information you're looking for, right? We're not just asking survey questions for the sake of asking survey questions. We're not just asking questions in a QBR for the sake of asking questions. We're
Right.
crafting those questions in a way that gives us actionable information that we then plan to go do something with, which
Exactly.
be there.
Well, okay, so let's take that, the action piece. Let's take that concept and move to marketing. So pricing today, it's one of my pet peeves. Pricing today gets set between marketing and sales to optimize for new customers. Drives me nuts because most of our revenue is coming from recurring customers in most companies. So what do we need to ask? We need to ask the question, how easy will it be to justify the price of Nuffsaid? By asking that question, you will learn lots of things like, is the customer getting value relative to the price? Are there missing features that would make it difficult for them to justify the price? Are there competitors pitching a similar product at a lower price? Or maybe the same price, but with more features? You learn so much by asking that question, and those insights, when recorded, can be shared back with the marketing team. So when it's time to do the next version of pricing, they're armed with actual live customer feedback and sentiment on pricing discussions that you have, which right now, they don't get any access to that. They're completely blind when it comes to making these pricing decisions. Another question you could ask is, are you considering alternatives to Nuffsaid? So this is a competitive intelligence question. Helps the marketing team think about how you can set up pricing in a way that is more competitive or more attractive relative to other products that are out there.
All right, so I know this is a tiny bit off of exactly what we're talking about here,
Sure.
Chris, but as long as we're talking about pricing, I'm just gonna say it, put it on the record, put your pricing on your website. Just do it, period, end of discussion. We can move on, but just, I felt obligated to put it out there.
Yeah, I think so. The customer will have a better experience if the pricing is on the website. I think that's full stop, and I don't think there's much disagreement about that. The challenge comes in, and I think the time that I've seen it be appropriate to not have pricing on the site is when a company is earlier in its evolution and is trying to iterate on pricing, and it needs to have the flexibility to change pricing on a regular basis, once every couple of weeks. And so that might be a time that,
if you're still testing your pricing.
Exactly. Yeah. So if your pricing isn't locked in, that might be a use case where you don't want to have pricing on the site. But
okay, there's an asterisk.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right.
Awesome. So, okay, I want to talk about, we've talked about the nitty gritty of what customer-led growth is, what it entails, how you measure it, how you implement it. I want to talk about how it impacts the role of a customer success leader for a company who is either trying to become a customer-led company or who has successfully accomplished that. How does that roll for that CS leader, whether it's like we talked about the head of CS or the CCO, how does that change?
Okay, so I'm going to call the pre-customer-led growth leader the 1.0 CS leader.
All right.
Okay, so the 1.0 customer success leader focused on running a better CS operation. So what do you hear? So when you're talking to a 1.0 CS leader when they're saying like, oh, we're going to do better onboarding this year. We're going to do better training. Actually, we're going to do better QBRs and playbooks. The problem with that is it's all internally focused. And let's be honest, every CSM or CS manager that's on this call, when was the last time you lost a customer because they didn't like the QBR that you offered them, or because they got value in 90 days instead of 30? When was the last time that something you did in CS was the reason why the customer churned? I almost guarantee you it's because you lost, the champion got lost, something with pricing, missing product features, customer lost budget. It's not a customer success problem. So the 2.0 leader recognizes that. They recognize that most of the reasons for churn are not about running a better customer success team. It's actually about running a better business. So the way that the 2.0 leader, the customer-led growth leader, adapts to this is they become a champion for the customer receiving value. That's what they see their role as. So that they make sure that their CSM team is armed to collect customer value feedback along the customer journey. They focus a lot on building a database of customer feedback that can be shared externally. And a couple other things in terms of our operations. They step up to take more revenue responsibility. There's no way around that. Mm-hmm. They ensure that that there are company level goals set around customer value. A bad goal would be, we're going to increase NRR by net retention rate by 4 points. That would be a bad company goal because it doesn't capture the value that customers are receiving.
True.
They do a good job of advocating for and increasing the CS team's budget. So you see that the 2.0 leader is really good at increasing budget every year, not having it squeezed. And the last thing that I mentioned before, they set up data repositories that anyone in the company can use to make decisions. And they help make that repository the most important data at the company for making decisions. So that's how we go from the 1.0 world, where we're focused on, better onboarding and QBRs and, better internal CS processes, to actually we're focused on the customer getting value, and we're focused on gathering the data that's needed to drive a better company.
Really, really important distinction. So we started to talk about this at the very beginning, some of the impact that we can see from companies implementing this customer-led model. But I want to expand on that. I want to talk first. Let's talk about, okay, if there are people out there listening today who had an aha moment during this conversation and they're like, oh my gosh, I need to go start being a customer leader, right? I need to go and convince my company that we need to be customer led. First of all, where should they start? Let's start there, and then I'll ask the second part.
Yeah, you're saying, how do you start with customer-led growth?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's what I'd recommend. Start first by understand the customer journey. So just write down, what does a customer go through in the sales process? How many steps are there? Then the handoff to customer success. How are you engaging with them with onboarding? Post onboarding, how are you engaging with them during the main period of usage? What does the renewal process look like? Then once you know what the customer journey looks like, start by defining a library of questions that you can ask to uncover the real experience that customers are having. And by the way, Nuffsaid, ESG, we can help you with those questions if it's not obvious.
Yes. And we can help you with the journey mapping part too, PS.
Right, okay, yeah, so both of those. And actually, I think ESG would be a great partner for that. Then once you have the questions, step number one, just start asking the questions and recording them. So that's an easy first step. So get your rating scale set up, get your qualitative responses, start to build that data set. Yeah. Later, we can level up and mature and talk about how we take that data set and start arming product and sales and marketing. But just to get started, I think that's the easiest, simplest way. You could come up with the customer journey in a week or two. You can have the questions lined up a week or two after that. So by the end of February, you can be ready to go with your new customer-led model.
Yeah, I think that's important too, that it doesn't have to be the ultimate version right away, right?
Yeah, that's right.
What can you start with first? What can you accomplish in a short period of time that can get you pretty far, right? You can always go back and iterate, always go back and improve, but what can you do now? Really important.
And Justin, why is it called Nuffsaid? We did a ton of market research, and Nuffsaid, when we tested out the name, it kind of relates to what we do, but Nuffsaid was either loved or hated by everyone. And it was the emotional response that I wanted. So it wasn't the favorite name, but it was the one that everyone had the strongest emotional reaction to, which means it's memorable. So that's where the name came from.
That's true. I like that. All right, so part two of my last question, I guess. Okay, so you're a CS leader listening today. You're going to take Chris's advice. You're going to go create that customer journey map, create that list of questions. After you've done that, right, you can probably do that without approval or budget or
Sure. Yeah.
really whatever. You can do that pretty independently. After that, it starts to get a little more complicated, I would imagine, and you got to go ask for some help, maybe some budget, definitely some cross-organizational collaboration, all of that. So talk to us about what are some of the really compelling sort of why statements, I guess, right? What have companies who have done this seen? What impact has it made that a CS leader could take to their senior leadership and say, hey, if we go do this project that I want to lead, if we go make this change in how we do business, we are going to start to see these results. What are those results?
And we're gonna take it all the way back to the very beginning.
Yep.
The story that the CS leader needs to tell to the CEO is our goal. Actually, not even our goal. You as the CEO are tasked with growing company value.
Right.
The quickest way to grow company value is to improve the company's retention rates. Full stop. That's the story. We can show them the Bessemer research report that shows that correlation between retention rates and company value. So what's the why of this? The why to be customer led is it is the quickest way to give investors what they want to reward your company with higher valuations. It's the quickest way to drive up retention rates. It allows the company to acquire customers less, or acquire revenue less expensively. And so what do you get out of this? You get happier, you get better product market fit, higher retention rates, lower cost to acquire revenue. That's what we're chasing with customer-led growth. That's what the leader takes to the CEO, because the CEO really needs to buy into this concept. So you have to start with the CEO, and if you want, you can use the operating room example that we discussed, right? Which is, how dare a surgeon go into the operating room, only look at all of the, all the sensors and not ask the patient how they're feeling? How dare they? And as a CEO, how dare you make an assessment about whether or not customers are getting value without asking them?
It's compelling, really compelling. Those, we're talking about metrics that are so consequential to your business, right? They go so much broader than just your customer success bubble that you live in. To your point, Chris, it's the company-wide thing.
That's right. Yeah, it needs to start with the executive team, the CEO buying in. But like we said, there are things that you can do, small things that you can do early on to show the company how powerful it is to get the actual voice of the customer and have that data set available.
Yep, absolutely. Awesome. Let's see, we have a question from Brian Perry. Chris, do you have a link to that report that you mentioned that we can send out with the recording?
We do. And Natalie, if you're still on the call, it'd be great if you could drop in a link. If Natalie isn't on the call, Brian, we can send a follow-up note with a link to that report. But anyway, Bessemer Venture Partners did the initial analysis. Gainsight did their own analysis on the correlation between Bessemer's report and the impact that retention rate has on company valuation. It's a very compelling data set. So definitely have a look and share it around internally. And it looks like Natalie isn't sharing that link here. Okay, so we'll follow up afterwards.
Yeah, we'll track it down and we'll send it out with the recording of this session tomorrow.
Great.
Awesome. So Chris, I have a couple more questions for you, but if anyone else in the audience has questions as well, please go ahead and throw them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we will get to as many as we can. So I know Nuffsaid is either you just published or you're about to publish a new magazine on customer-led growth.
Yeah.
Give us a little sneak peek into what that's all about.
Yeah, totally. So so here it is, fresh off the press. We just launched it on Tuesday of this week. The theme, not surprising, the theme is customer-led growth. In the magazine, we talk about We go into more detail about how you use customer data to influence product, ICP, pricing. We talk about what it looks like for customer success to own pre-sales. So we've got some chief customer officers that own that function very successfully. We go into depth about how to mature and level up your CS ops team. We talk about digital CS and how to level up how you're doing your low touch / digital CS programs. So anyway, we cover lots of different things in here. It is written for more of a customer success leader audience. However, if you're a CSM, I think you're going to find it interesting because it'll help you get into the mindset of a senior leader at your company. So it's a good career growth read. So definitely recommend it for both leaders and CSMs.
Awesome. Very important. All right. I'm going to say last call for questions. Oh, I see one. We have an anonymous question coming through.
Okay.
All right, Chris, you mentioned that CS should have a number. How do you recommend starting that conversation? It's a good one.
Yeah. So it depends on who the top CS leader reports to. Mm-hmm. If the top CS leader reports into sales, it's a little bit of a harder discussion because the sales leader will want to ultimately own the overall revenue. So if there's a CRO in place, so I'd say it's a little bit harder if you're talking about the CRO, but let's talk about the easier case. If the head of success reports into the CEO or the COO, it's very easy. And a CS leader could just say, look, our team is ready for revenue responsibility. We think we will have the best impact on driving overall net retention and revenue if we own the number because we have all the customer relationships. Mm-hmm. So it's time for the company to step up and improve its results on revenue. So we want to own that number. That's for the CEO or the COO. That's usually an easy yes. If the VP of CS reports into the CRO, that's trickier, and there's some politics that come into this, right? Because the CRO doesn't want to feel like they're losing power. And of course, the CRO is very sensitive to having power in the organization. So the best way to have the conversation with the CRO is to take it in little baby steps. So say like, look, what we'd like to do is we'd like to own renewals for our low touch or our small customers first, mm-hmm. and show some success there. Then you can go and say, okay, well, we've done a great job with the low touch customers. Let's go ahead and do mid-market now. And then once you've shown some success in mid-market, then, hey, we'd like to take more commercial ownership of some of our enterprise accounts. And so you can kind of build up it's unlikely to be everything at once, but with baby steps, it's, for a CRO, it's it's not a big threat to start off with owning renewals for the low touch segment.
Yeah. Does anyone else sense a theme here? Baby steps are important.
Rachel, you can order a copy of the magazine. Natalie, if you can drop that in the chat, we can get that there. And also, if everyone sees, Natalie dropped a link to the Gainsight report and the Bessemer report. So both of those are available there in the chat.
Thank you, Natalie. Appreciate you checking those down. They're in the chat. And like I said, we will send them out in a follow-up email tomorrow as well. So lots of good links, good follow-up that we will be sharing with you all. So, Chris.
Last thing.
I was going to say, last words of wisdom for us.
Make sure you go in to the rubric. I'm going to share my screen one more time. Make sure you go into the rubric and either you or make your executive rate themselves on how good your company is at being customer-led. So that's also a quick way to get the team aligned more around customers. So if you like what you're hearing from both me and Marley today, just hop onto LinkedIn, follow us, follow our companies. We publish a lot of CS content. Like I mentioned before, Marley has a very impressive digital CS maturity model, one of the best I've seen. So really great thinking that coming out of ESG and Marley. So follow us on LinkedIn, and we'd love to stay in touch and do more of these with you in the community.
Absolutely, and excited for podcast episode that we just recorded to come out in a couple weeks, and always really fun to chat with you, Chris. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all for joining us today. A reminder, you'll receive a recording and those links within 24 hours. And I hope everyone will join us again next month when I will be joined by Perry Monaco, Head of Customer Success at LinkedIn, and Jim Mercer, Head of Customer Success at Zoom. So until then, thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.